What if you inherited a theater that was your father's life's work, only to be told you had no right to stand on its stage? What if every flyer you posted was torn down, every rehearsal sabotaged, every voice you lifted mocked as noise? This is the story of Clara Evans, a young black woman who dared to claim what was already hers. In the Monarch Theatre, a house that once thrived on her father's dreams, she faced a board determined to erase her, a town ready to ridicule her, and a system built to keep her silent. But Clara was not silent. With every drumbeat, every hymn, and every trembling voice that dared to sing beside her, she turned humiliation into defiance. She fought not just for herself, but for a community that had been pushed to the shadows too long. And tonight you'll hear how she reclaimed her stage, broke the chains that barred her doors, and proved that truth cannot be locked away. Stay with us, this is the Theater Curtain, only on Blackness Hour. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, make sure you subscribe now, so you never miss the next voice that refuses to be silenced. The brass keys jingled faintly in Clara Evans's palm as if they were alive, as if the theater itself could not wait to breathe again. She stood at the corner of Maple Street, the late afternoon sun slanting long and golden across the row of brick storefronts, and stared at the building that had shaped her whole childhood. The Monarch Theatre. It looked smaller than she remembered, yet impossibly grander too, like an aging monarch itself, weary with years but still holding dignity in its bones. Half the bulbs in the marquee had gone dark, but the others still flickered stubbornly, little survivors clinging to their sockets. 3 letters had fallen from the sign, leaving Mona CH, but in Clara's mind the full word glowed as brightly as ever. The Monarch. The name carried weight. It carried legacy. It carried her father's voice. She took a slow breath, feeling the thick Alabama air coat her lungs with heat and dust. Around her, the town bustled as if nothing important had happened, shopkeepers drawing down shades, a horse clopping down the far end of the street, white families strolling on the opposite sidewalk, glancing at her with a mixture of curiosity and dismissal. To them, she was just another colored woman standing still in the middle of the day. They didn't know, or maybe they did, and it burned them, that the building towering behind her now belonged to her. Clara closed her hand around the keys until the ridges pressed little half-moons into her skin. They were heavier than she expected. Not the weight of brass, but of history, of expectation, of every dream her father had poured into this theater. "Papa," she whispered, soft as a prayer. "I'm here." The wind seemed to answer, rattling the poster frames along the brick facade. Behind the glass, faded flyers clung to brittle paper, names of plays long past, most of them white touring productions that had pushed her father's work aside. But one corner still showed a scrap of a poster he had written and directed. The Silent River. Clara remembered it vividly. She had been only 12, sitting in the front row, watching her father's words crash against the walls of the theater like waves. Her throat tightened. She pulled the scarf around her shoulders a little tighter, as if the memory itself had chilled her. Then she pushed forward. The side stage door groaned on its hinges. The same groan she remembered from childhood, when she had sneaked through during rehearsals to curl up in the wings and watch her father work. The smell hit her instantly, old velvet, dust, wood, and something faintly metallic. It was a smell she could never mistake, the smell of a theater waiting for breath. Inside, shadows stretched long. Dust motes swirled in the narrow shafts of sunlight that pierced through cracked windows high above. The lobby tiles, black and cream squares, bore the wear of 1,000 footsteps, their surfaces smoothed by time. The once grand chandelier drooped under the weight of cobwebs, its crystal teardrops dulled and yellowed. Clara let her fingers drift along the ticket counter. She could almost see Mr. Lionel, the cheerful old man who used to sit there with his stubby pencil and booming laugh, cracking jokes to nervous young actors. His voice was gone, but the counter still held the memory of his rhythm. She picked up the keys, let them fall with a deliberate clink onto the counter, and just listened. Buildings carry memory, if you are quiet enough. And the Monarch remembered. It remembered applause rising like thunder, remembered curtains parting with breathless hush, remembered the sound of her father's voice filling it with fire and poetry. She could feel all of it pressing around her, not ghostly, not haunting, but alive. Clara stepped down the aisle toward the auditorium. Red velvet seats stretched in neat rows, slouching here and there with age, but still noble, still loyal. She brushed her fingers across the backs as she passed, whispering to each one like an old friend. "This is the best seat," she murmured, echoing the words she had once spoken as a child. Back then she had tapped every chair, declaring each one the best because her father was on stage and she was the proudest daughter alive. Her footsteps echoed softly on the worn carpet. The silence of the house was almost holy, like a church waiting for worshippers. She climbed onto the stage, her shoes creaking against scuffed boards marked by generations of feet. At center stage, faint chalk lines still lingered, outlines from some long-forgotten rehearsal. She knelt and pressed her palm to the floor. It was cool, gritty with dust. She closed her eyes, and for a moment she swore she felt it pulse beneath her hand. Her father's pulse, the audience's, her own. "Papa," she whispered again, the word catching in her throat. She remembered his voice so clearly it seemed to echo in the rafters. "Clara, you always find the light. That's what theater is. We tell them where to look when everything else is trying to blind them." Her chest tightened. She stood slowly, her legs trembling with the weight of memory. She turned toward the wings. The ropes of the fly system hung like tired soldiers, frayed but proud. The callboard was still pinned with yellowing notes. "Take 5!" and a grocery list in her father's quick hand. Someone had scrawled a heart around the word coffee. Clara reached out and touched the rope, feeling its rough fibers. She closed her eyes and saw herself as a girl, perched on a stool, watching her father rehearse actors. His baritone filled the space as he reminded them, "The truth has a rhythm, and you must never lose it." Her eyes burned. She inhaled sharply, willing herself not to break, not now. But the grief rose like water, sudden and overwhelming. She bent, hands braced against her knees, breath catching in short gasps. She hadn't allowed herself to cry at the funeral, not when the town watched, not when her mother clutched her hand. But here, in the empty Monarch, the tears came hot and unstoppable. She pressed her hands flat against the faded velvet drape and whispered, "I'll keep it alive! I swear it! I'll keep it alive for you!" The silence absorbed her vow. And then, footsteps. Sharp, measured, echoing from the lobby. Clara stiffened, swiping at her wet cheeks. She straightened her back, lifted her chin. This was her house now. Whoever came through those doors would have to know that truth. 2 men appeared, their silhouettes cutting into the dim auditorium. One was tall, pale, with neatly parted hair and a tan suit. His tie was perfectly knotted, his shoes polished. The other was older, heavier, with a florid face and the smugness of someone who had never known hunger. They approached down the aisle as if they owned the place. Clara stayed where she was, stage lights catching her figure. She did not step back. The tall man smiled thinly. "Miss Evans, I presume? I'm Mr. Whitford, acting chair of the Monarch's Board of Trustees. This is Mr. Cole, our treasurer. We received notice from Pryor and Pryor about the estate transfer." Clara's jaw tightened. She forced her voice calm. "That's right. The Monarch is mine now. And I intend to begin work immediately." Mr. Cole chuckled, a wet, unpleasant sound. "Work, eh? HM. We'll see." Whitford's smile did not reach his eyes. "Of course, the board safeguards tradition and reputation. We'll oversee while you learn how things are done here." Clara's heart beat like a drum, but her face betrayed nothing. She lifted her chin. "I won't just observe," she said steadily. "I will lead." Their eyes narrowed, and the weight of their dismissal pressed heavy in the dust-thick air. The silence after Clara's words was thick, pressing against the velvet walls of the Monarch like a second curtain. Dust floated in the beams of light cutting through high windows, and the 2 men stood there, measuring her as if she were a problem to be managed rather than an heir to be respected. Whitford adjusted his tie, eyes sweeping the stage as though even the boards might betray him. On paper, he said smoothly, you own the deed. But you must understand, Miss Evans, the Monarch is more than property. It's tradition. It belongs to this town. To its donors. To its patrons. Cole added with a smirk. And tradition, well, tradition isn't so easily signed over. Their words dropped like stones into Clara's chest. She stood still at center stage, the drape behind her like a wounded giant, and felt her father's absence burning. But she also felt his voice, deep and insistent, like a drumbeat in her memory. Don't shrink, little light. Never shrink in your own house. Her voice was quiet, but steady. Tradition has always had a way of protecting some more than others. My father built this theater with stories they wouldn't let us tell anywhere else. This is mine now. And I intend to honor it by keeping it alive for all of us. The men exchanged glances, irritation flashing. Cole stepped forward, pointing at the stage. For now, we'll ask that you refrain from occupying the stage itself. Observe operations from the office. Or the lobby. Let the staff continue as they always have. Once you've had time to learn, perhaps then. Clara's heart jolted, fury rising fast. Refrain from occupying the stage. Her own stage. The one her father had bled for, prayed for, poured himself into until his last breath. They were telling her she could not stand in the very space her name was written upon by law and by legacy. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. For a split second, fear trembled through her, the familiar, generational fear of white men with power in their voices. But then something stronger pushed up, heat in her chest, righteous and unyielding. She lifted her chin. I own this theater, she said softly, and I will not be told to stand in the lobby while others breathe its air in my place. Whitford's face hardened, his smooth mask cracking. He gestured sharply to the back, and Clara became aware, for the first time, that others had gathered, stagehands in dusty boots, the production manager Mr. Ransom with his silver whistle, Elaine from front of house with her clipboard. They lingered in the shadows, watching this strange new battle unfold. And then, another sound. The creak of the lobby door opening. Clara turned her head. At the top of the aisle stood two teenagers, no older than 16, their dark faces lit with awe. They had slipped inside quietly, drawn by curiosity, by rumor, by hope. Leon and Percy, she would later learn their names. But now they just stared, wide-eyed, clutching their caps in their hands. Miss Evans? One of them asked timidly, his voice carrying down the empty rows. Is it true you're gonna be holding auditions? My cousin said. His words faltered under the glare of the board members. Whitford turned, his voice sharp as glass. This is a private meeting. Out. Now. The boys shrank back a step, but Clara felt something fierce rise within her. She faced them fully, her expression softening into a smile. Yes, she said clearly. Yes, it's true. There will be auditions. Very soon. Leave your names with me before you go. Whitford's jaw tightened. His hand twitched as if to silence her, but she turned away from him, climbed the last step to center stage, and laid her palms flat against the faded velvet curtain. The theater seemed to shudder with her. The staff whispered nervously. The board bristled. And then Clara did the one thing none of them expected. She began to hum. It was low at first, a single note barely louder than breath. But the sound traveled, carried by the bones of the building, caught in the chandelier's crystal and returned like a memory. She closed her eyes and let the hum grow into a melody her mother had once sung while sewing costumes late into the night. A work song, a hymn, a rhythm that marked time and turned sorrow into strength. Her voice trembled, then steadied, climbing the rafters. The two boys at the back looked at one another. Percy pressed his hand to his chest and joined in, his harmony fragile but bright. Leon added his own, and suddenly the silence of the Monarch was gone, replaced by the sound of voices weaving together, defiant and holy. The chandelier seemed to tremble with the vibration. Dust cascaded like falling stars. The staff shifted uneasily, One of the stagehands tapped his foot in spite of himself before snatching it back. Even Elaine's pen stilled mid-scratch. Whitford snapped. "Miss Evans. This is inappropriate." His voice cracked with fury, echoing small against the swell of music. Clara opened her eyes, her voice strong now. She sang louder, words forming. "This house is ours, our stories live here, we will not bow, we will not disappear." The boys echoed her, their young voices fierce. For a heartbeat, the Monarch breathed again, alive, awake, its very walls remembering who it had been built for. When at last the note faded, the hush that followed was thick with something larger than fear. Something even Whitford could not name. Clara let the silence linger. Then she spoke, quiet but steady. "This is my stage. I will not leave it. You may bring your remedies, your papers, your traditions. But when you do, I will still be here." Whitford's face was crimson. Cole muttered something under his breath. With clipped gestures, they turned and stormed out, the echo of their heels retreating up the aisle. The two boys remained, trembling with excitement. Clara turned to them, her expression soft again. "Names," she said gently. "Leon," the first whispered. "Percy," said the second. She took the ledger from the stage desk, flipped it open, and wrote their names carefully under a single word, auditions. Then she underlined it twice. As the light outside dimmed toward evening, Clara picked up a broom. She swept the stage slowly, each stroke scattering dust into golden beams. The boys helped, laughing nervously, their voices still buzzing from the song. When they left, she stood alone again in the Monarch. She pressed her hand to the boards and whispered to her father. "They might try to lock these doors before we open them. But doors remember hands, Papa. And this one remembers ours." Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Inside, the Monarch drew its first long breath in years. Morning sunlight streamed across the Monarch's facade, glinting off windows that hadn't been polished in years. Clara stood outside the front doors with a bundle of fresh flyers in her hand. She had spent half the night writing them by lamplight, words bold and clear. The Monarch Theatre, now under the direction of Clara Evans. New season auditions coming soon. Her heart thudded as she taped the first flyer to the glass. The reflection staring back at her looked braver than she felt, scarf tied firm, eyes unflinching. She whispered to herself, "Claim the space. Claim it in the open." But whispers had already spread through town. Across the street, a pair of white women carrying shopping baskets stopped and stared. One leaned close to the other and muttered something sharp, their laughter cutting through the morning air. A grocer unloading crates paused, looked Clara up and down, and shook his head. The message was clear: they didn't see her as an owner. They saw her as an intruder. Inside the theater, the mood was no warmer. When Clara entered, the staff had already gathered. Elaine with her clipboard, Mr. Ransom with his whistle, and the stage crew leaning against the wall, arms crossed. "Good morning," Clara said, her voice calm, steady. "We'll start today by walking the fly system and checking the counterweights. Safety comes first." A low chuckle broke from one of the crewmen. "Safety, huh? Lady, we've been running this place longer than you've been alive. Don't need no lesson from you." Clara held his gaze, refusing to shrink. "Then it should take no more than 10 minutes to show me what you already know." Ransom blew his whistle, sharp and impatient. "The board told us you'd be observing only, not giving orders." For a moment, the words stung. But Clara inhaled deeply and let the air settle her spine. "The board may have their say," she answered, "but this theater has my father's name written in its beams. I won't observe my own house from the sidelines." Elaine scribbled on her clipboard with exaggerated flourish. "We'll note that in the log," she said. "Deviation from protocol." Clara felt her pulse pound in her ears, but she refused to let them see her crack. Instead, she turned and began walking toward the stage. Her heels clicked against the boards with deliberate rhythm, every step a declaration: "I belong here. I belong here." The crew exchanged uneasy looks, but none moved to follow. By noon, the flyers had disappeared from the front doors. torn down, crumpled on the sidewalk. Clara bent and picked one up, smoothing it with trembling fingers. The paper was damp from the morning dew, the ink smeared. She looked around, but the street was quiet, its silence heavier than noise. Whoever had ripped them down had wanted her to feel it, wanted her to know she was unwelcome even in her own inheritance. She clutched the flyer to her chest and whispered, "You tried to silence Papa's plays, too?" And still he wrote. Inside, she lit a small lamp in the box office and began to write again. This time in thicker ink, her letters bold as a challenge. "The Monarch will reopen. Auditions this month. All are welcome." The afternoon brought her first meeting with the board since the confrontation on stage. Clara entered the conference room, the same room where her father had once planned entire seasons, and found it transformed. White men in suits lined the long oak table. Donors' wives perched in chairs along the wall, their pearls catching the light. At the head sat Whitford, his papers stacked neatly, his eyes cold. The seat at the end, the one her father had always claimed, sat empty, waiting. Clara walked toward it. Her steps were measured, her face composed, though her stomach twisted like a rope pulled too tight. She set her hand on the back of the chair. "Miss Evans," Whitford said quickly, his voice slicing the air. "That seat is reserved for the chair." Clara let her hand linger for a heartbeat, then slid it away and sat along the side, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. Whitford shuffled his papers. "Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, ownership has transferred to Miss Evans. However, let us be clear, the continuity of this institution rests in our stewardship. Donors must be reassured that tradition remains intact." A ripple of nods, murmurs of agreement. Clara's jaw tightened. "Tradition without change is decay. My father didn't build the Monarch so it could be a mausoleum for other people's voices." Cole's laugh was sharp and condescending. "With respect, your father had passions. But box office is box office. Touring companies bring in money. Your community projects will not." Clara's cheeks burned, but she kept her voice calm. "My father filled this theater on nights you called impossible. He did it with plays that spoke truth. I intend to do the same." A woman at the far end whispered loudly enough to be heard, "She'll drive it into the ground." Another voice, "She's young, emotional, unfit." The words buzzed around her like wasps, stinging, relentless. Clara sat straighter, her back iron, and let them speak until the air reeked of their disdain. Then, when the room fell into expectant silence, she answered. "I may be young," she said quietly, "but I am not unfit. I was raised in these aisles, in these wings, in this very room. Every brick of this building knows my footsteps. You can tear down my flyers, you can deny me seats, but you cannot change what is written in these walls. I will not abandon what my father built." Her words landed like stones in still water. For a moment, the room went still. Even Whitford's mask slipped, just enough to show irritation. He gathered his papers with clipped precision. "Very well. We shall see how long conviction pays the bills. Until then, Miss Evans, kindly refrain from public announcements without board approval." Clara stood slowly, her chair scraping back with deliberate sound. She looked around the table, into every dismissive face, and smiled, not warmly, but like a promise. "You'll hear my announcements," she said, "with or without your approval." She left the room without waiting for dismissal, her heels striking the hallway tile in sharp rhythm, echoing through the Monarch's bones like a drum. By the time Saturday came, the Monarch smelled faintly of lemon oil and rain. Clara had spent 2 days and most of 2 nights polishing what could be polished, mending what could be mended, and disguising what could not. The chandelier still leaned like a tired shoulder, but the dust was gone. Seat backs shone where her cloth had passed. Fresh flyers were taped to the glass again, this time with paste heavy enough to laugh at fingers. "Open house, season announcement," they read. "Community meet and greet on stage for p.m." She arrived at noon with a box of paper cups and a carafe of sweet tea. Leon and Percy were already there, sweeping the lobby with the earnestness of boys who'd been told their dreams might have a place to live. Leon kept breaking into scales. Percy kept dancing the broom, as if even cleaning deserved rhythm. "Save some for the audience," Clara teased, and their smiles flashed like brass. By one, the sabotage began. The first blow was small, a key that suddenly didn't fit the rehearsal room door. "Mr. Ransom tilted his head thoughtfully as she struggled with the lock, the silver whistle rocking against his chest. "Strange," he said. "Old buildings keep secrets." Clara moved to the next door. It opened with a stubborn sigh. Inside, the piano sat shrouded. She reached to lift the cover and found the bench gone. She looked at Ransom. He shrugged. "Borrowed for a function," he said. "Somewhere that pays." "Bring it back," Clara said evenly. "We pay in something larger." At 2, Elaine arrived with her clipboard and a smile that set Clara's teeth on edge. Behind her, 2 ushers, boys with slick hair and the look of men rehearsing the rest of their lives, lugged a velvet rope and stanchions into the lobby. "What's that?" Clara asked. "Capacity control," Elaine said. "Fire code. And certain seating expectations. Donors will need the front rows reserved." Clara's gaze flicked to the flyers. "It's an open house," she said. "For the community." "Of course," Elaine answered, already measuring where to place the rope. "Within reason." Clara stood very still, a discipline she'd learned from her father. Stillness that told a room who was in charge of breath. "Remove the rope," she said quietly. "If the fire marshal arrives, I will speak to him myself." Elaine held her stare 2 seconds too long, then gestured. The boys carried the rope back out, their eyes sliding from Clara to the floor the way some people avoid mirrors. At 3, a florist stuck her head through the door, peered at Clara, and left without entering. At 3:15, someone cut the power to the footlights. Leon noticed first. "Miss Evans," he said, tapping the metal housings. These were glowing. "Now they ain't." Clara knelt, checked the cable run, followed it to the wing. The breaker box stood open, a lever lowered like a slapped hand. She lifted it. The footlights hummed. "Must be these old lines, Mr. Ransom said from the shadows, his voice innocent as a kitten. Clara met his eyes. "So we'll lift them again," she said. "And again. Until they learn which way is up." Outside, the sky bruised toward evening. Summer thunderheads stacked at the horizon like furniture on a lawn. People began to gather, curious white couples who drifted in with the air of tourists, black families who stepped through the doors like they were entering a sanctuary. Clara shook hands until her palm burned, saying welcome so often it learned new meaning, not simply come in, but this is yours. At 10:04, Whitford appeared with 2 board members and the kind of smile a man wears when he expects victory. He took in the lobby, the clusters of neighbors, the boys at the doors, and something in his jaw tightened. He took Elaine aside. They spoke in low voices. Elaine nodded and wrote something with aggressive neatness. "Miss Evans," Whitford said, approaching. "A word." Clara folded a stack of programs. She typed them herself that morning, each page a prayer, and set them on the table. "A word will be fine," she said. "The stage will speak the rest." He lowered his voice. "We would prefer the speaking to be done from the orchestra pit. Or the lobby. This event has not been sanctioned." Clara studied him the way a carpenter studies a bent nail. "People are here," she said. "They are sanctioned by breath and by need." His smile thinned. "If you insist on spectacle, we'll have to insist on standards." He gestured toward Elaine, who had already begun separating programs into 2 stacks, donors and general admission. Clara moved her hand, covering the labels until the ink smudged. "Take that down," she said. "No partitions today." Something shifted in the room. A few heads turned. A murmur ran along the tile-like current. Whitford took a breath to deliver whatever speech he had polished for such defiance. Clara didn't wait for it. "4 o'clock," she called to Leon and Percy. "Open the doors." They threw the bolts with ceremonial clacks. The house swallowed the audience like a hungry thing. People filed down the aisles, eyes shining the way eyes shine when they suspect they're about to witness themselves. Clara followed last, pausing at the lip of the stage to feel the wood under her soles. She lifted her chin. Footlights buzzed. The house lights dimmed, then flickered back to full. Clara looked to the wing. Mr. Ransom's whistle glittered as he shrugged. Old building, he mouthed. Clara stepped to center. The mic on the stand had been polished to a high, lying shine. She placed her hands lightly on either side of it. In the front row, a white couple folded their arms, preemptively offended. 3 rows back, a cluster of church ladies straightened their hats with military precision. Near the aisle, 2 little girls swung their feet, their eyes like saucers. Clara tried the mic. Good even. Silence. She tried again. Good. The mic stood like a peony, all show, no scent. She looked over its head into the faces gathered. She did not look to the wing where she could feel Whitford's satisfaction like cold breath. Her father's voice arrived in her ear, sure as if he'd leaned there, when they killed the device, be the device. The first theater didn't need wires. It needed lungs. Clara drew a long breath and let it out as sound. Good evening, she said, no amplification and no apology. Her voice filled the Monarch because it knew the space to fill. She placed each word the way a mason lays brick. My name is Clara Evans. This theater bears the history of my father's work and the promise of ours. We are here to reopen what should never have closed to us. In the wing, she saw Whitford move, a shadow that wanted to become a wall. On stage, she kept talking, and the words built their own city. We'll audition. We'll rehearse. We'll put bodies on this stage that look like the bodies who've been asked to sit in the dark too long. We will not apologize for telling the truth in a voice loud enough to be heard from Maple to Maine. She paused. Breath moved through the house like tide. She could see it, the leaning forward, the lift in chests, the delicate thing that happens when a room chooses to hope. Then the house lights cut to black. For a heartbeat, the audience exhaled in a single, surprised vowel. The only glow left was the weak line of the footlights, bleeding gold against her shoes. Clara did not step back. She could feel the fear trying to pick the lock of her knees. She let it knock. It did not enter. Old buildings, she said into the hush, do mischief when they're waking up. A chuckle, then another. A ripple of courage. She lifted a hand and snapped once, the sound crisp as a match. Leon, she said. Percy. From the wings, the boys appeared, each carrying a drum they had dragged up from the pit. They sat at either end of the stage. Leon began a soft heartbeat rhythm. Percy answered with a syncopation that made the house involuntarily nod. Clara stepped into that pocket as if it had been tailored for her. We're going to begin, she said. With or without every light. With or without permission. Because stories don't wait for perfect weather. Somewhere in the darkness, someone said, Amen, in a voice half laugh, half cry. Clara opened her mouth to continue, and saw Mr. Ransom step forward, 2 men in security jackets at his back. Miss Evans, he called, voice amplified by a battery-powered bullhorn, oily with authority. For safety and compliance, I must ask you to conclude these remarks and vacate the stage. In the footlights, Clara's shadow danced like an argument. She lowered her chin a fraction. I'm concluding nothing, she said softly. We're just getting to the part where we remember ourselves. The security men mounted the stairs. In the second row, a church lady set her jaw and stood. She's the owner, she said, hat trembling like a flag. You will not touch her in her own house. Her voice cracked something open. More people stood, black mostly, though a white couple in the back rose too, tentative, as if they'd realized they had a chance to become the versions of themselves they claimed to be. The security men hesitated. Mr. Ransom lifted his whistle, and the sound he made was thin and ridiculous against the drums. Clara lifted her hands, palms open. No hands, she told the room. No breaking. Only music. Leon and Percy tightened the rhythm like laces. Clara began to hum. Not Defiance this time, not yet, something steadier, a tune meant to keep a crowd from tipping. Voices joined, a few at first, then more, until the dark was full of a sung promise. The house lights flared to a flicker and died again. Outside, thunder stacked closer. Inside, breath and drum and hum held the floor. The storm arrived in one hard breath. Rain struck the roof like applause turned to warning. The air in the theater cooled and sharpened, thick with the imminent decision of men who believe paper outshranks pulse. Whitford strode out from the wing with a folded sheet and the certainty of someone who has never been told no by a room. The bullhorn passed from Mr. Ransom's hand to his like a baton in a relay. They were sure they were winning. Ladies and gentlemen, Whitford said, his voice buzzing over the drum, for safety and order, tonight's unauthorized assembly is concluded. Please make your way to the lobby in an orderly fashion. No, someone said, simple as the ground under a foot. Clara let silence swallow the last hum. She stepped forward until her toes were at the lip of the stage, so close she could feel the heat rising from the bodies below. We are not concluded, she said. We are beginning. Whitford's mouth tightened. He held up the paper. By order of the Board of Trustees of the Monarch Theatre, programming decisions remain under board purview until a full review of programming? Clara said, the word tasting sour. You cut the power to a greeting. You've reduced music to menace. The only program tonight is neighbors meeting themselves. Enough, he snapped. Security. The two men hesitated at the foot of the steps, measuring the density of the crowd, the tilt of the storm, their own desire to be remembered kindly by the people who would see them tomorrow at the grocer. Clara turned her head, found the darkness where the balcony held shadows, and raised her voice to carry there too. You came through rain to a building that forgot your name. I am telling it your name now. Leon. Percy. Miss Hattie in the blue hat. Mr. Dupree who fixed the roof in 49. Little Ruthie who learned to clap on the 2 and 4 in this very aisle. You are the season. Thunder walked down the block. In the sound, the footlights dimmed to embers. For one breath the theater became the oldest version of itself, a body of people under a roof, gathered to share difficult air. Whitford lifted the bullhorn. Remove her, he said to the men, and something in the way he said her lifted the lid off a century. The first guard stepped up onto the stage. Clara didn't retreat. She did what her father had taught her for nights when a lion goes missing and fear tries to take the space where breath should be. She made a mark. She bent, drew an X on the floor with the heel of her shoe, and stood on it. Sir, she said to the guard, not unkindly, I own these boards. I have the deed in a drawer where my mother used to keep buttons and the courage for hard days. I have the memory of building this season with a man who taught me to fit truth to a stage until there was no space left for lying. I have names in the ledger under auditions and a pencil sharp enough to add more. I am not leaving. The guard's eyes flicked to Whitford, to the crowd, to the little girls in the third row swinging their feet, to Miss Hattie's hat pinned like a declaration to her head. He took a half-step back without meaning to. The other guard scratched his neck as if it itched under a collar of shame. Mr. Ransom tried the whistle again. It sounded like what it was, a toy. He tucked it away, embarrassed by its smallness. Whitford's color rose. Very well, he hissed. If you will not respect the institution will protect itself. He gestured toward the wings, and a man in a city jacket, facilities, appeared with a ring of heavy keys and a face like a frown. Lock it, Whitford said. Cut everything. Shut it down. The man hesitated. There are folks inside, he murmured. No, Whitford said, voice scraping bone. The man moved to the side wall and threw a master switch. Whatever power the old theater had left sighed away. The footlights died. The exit signs went dark. Only the breath of the people and the tapping rain remained. For a long heartbeat, no one moved. Then Clara stepped off the X and down the stairs, one slow step at a time, until she stood at floor level, eye to eye with her audience. Her dress brushed the knees of the first row. She could smell rain on their coats, starch in their collars, the faint sweetness of peppermints unwrapped for long evenings. "Then we take the stage with us," she said. She turned and walked the aisle like a center line through a map. At the doors, Leon and Percy swung the bolts back with a flourish that felt like ceremony. Rain breathed into the lobby, cool and clean. People hesitated. Sunday's shoes, pressed skirts, hair set just so, then followed Clara out under the awning, into the sweet metallic air of a storm that meant to wash something away. On the sidewalk, Whitford tried to seize the frame again. "This is absurd," he said, but the words fell short of the place where the rain made its own language. Clara stepped into the edge of the downpour and raised her hands. "Auditions," she said, voice crisp as the rain. "Tomorrow morning. 10 o'clock. Here. If they lock the doors, we'll sing to the bricks until they remember who pays their mortgage. Bring your songs, your speeches, your dancing feet. If you have nothing, bring breath." A laugh, a shout, a rising murmur. Miss Hattie tilted her hat against the rain and said, "I'd been ready 50 years. The little girls clapped badly and perfectly. Someone down the block who had not been brave enough to enter the theater at all stepped under a storefront and called, "We'll be here, Miss Evans!" Clara looked back through the glass at the darkness that had been her father's church. She saw Whitford's silhouette, all angles and loss. She saw, beyond him in imagination, her father in Rose C., hat tipped, mouth folded around a smile he saved for moments like this. She turned to the people who had followed her into weather and lifted her chin. "Tomorrow," she said, and felt the word take root. As they dispersed, some into the rain with faces turned up like thirsty ground, some under umbrellas, some back to porches where radios hissed news and supper waited, Clara stayed. The awning dripped a steady metronome onto the steps. Leon and Percy lingered, drums tucked under their shirts to keep them dry, grinning as if sunrise had arrived early. "You were something," Leon said softly. "We were something," Clara said. "All of us." Across the street, a white couple lingered under a shop eave. The woman's eyes were wet. The man looked as if he'd seen a tool used for the first time in years and remembered he'd once known how to build. "You think they'll really lock you out?" Percy asked. Clara followed the rain down the gutters to the corner where Maple met everything else. "They might," she said. "Doors remember hands. But men forget." She touched the theater's brick. "We'll remind them." Lightning stitched the clouds. Thunder answered from somewhere a few miles off. Clara tucked the flyers closer to the glass, pressing the paste until it bit. Then she slid a pencil through the handles of the front doors, a child's trick her father had taught her, and smiled at the smallness of the rebellion. 10 o'clock, she said again, not to anyone in particular, and the Monarch, dark, old, stubborn, seemed to nod in the rain. Far down the block, a siren took a breath and decided against it. The storm softened to a steady, cleansing drum. In the golden hour between lightning and night, the neighborhood carried the story like a warm loaf. She stood her ground on her own stage. They tried to dim her voice. The people walked with her into the rain and found the edge of a beginning. Clara locked the side door from inside, checked the offices, ran a tender hand along the fly ropes as if greeting horses in a stable. In the box office, she opened the ledger and wrote, "Auditions, Sunday 10 a.m. Leon. Percy. Miss Hattie. Mr. Dupree. Ruthie. Bring breath." She closed the book, set the keys beside it, and let her forehead rest a moment on the wood. When she lifted it, her face was steady. She turned off the little lamp, which made hardly any difference in the dark, and stepped out into the last cool of the evening. The door closed behind her with the sound of a decision. Tomorrow, they would either open the Monarch or prove that it had already been open all along, just waiting for the right song. Morning came dressed in gray. A thin fog rolled down Maple Street, muting the colors of awnings and bricks. The Monarch loomed quiet, its dark windows like eyes that had not slept. Clara approached with her coat collar turned up and the ledger clutched under her arm. The pencil mark inside still shone, "Auditions, Sunday 10 a.m. Her nerves beat faster than her feet. She had hardly slept, listening all night to rain drum the roof of her mother's house, wondering who would come. Would anyone? Or would her courage of yesterday dissolve into a story about one woman talking to an empty stage? When she reached the front doors, her heart dropped. The flyers she had pasted so carefully were gone. Torn, shredded, and scattered across the sidewalk like confetti from a cruel parade. The glass gleamed bare except for one new paper, nailed with vicious precision right in the center of the frame. By order of the board, the Monarch is closed to unauthorized use. Trespassers will be removed. The ink was bold, black, merciless. Clara froze, her breath fogging the glass. Rage and humiliation knotted in her stomach. She thought of Leon and Percy, of Miss Hattie with her blue hat, of Ruthie's swinging feet. Had they seen this? Had it warned them away? She reached up and tore the notice free. The nail ripped her palm, leaving a thin line of red. She didn't flinch. She held the paper tight until her knuckles whitened, then crumpled it and shoved it deep into her coat pocket. "This is mine," she whispered to the door, to the bricks, to herself. "No paper can close what blood opened." At exactly 10, footsteps approached. Clara turned, hope rushing to her throat. Leon and Percy came first, drums slung over their shoulders. Their shoes were damp from puddles, but their faces were fierce. "Ma said if we get dragged out, we run faster back in," Leon said, grinning. Behind them came Miss Hattie, blue hat tilted like defiance, holding a bundle of sheet music. Mr. Dupree from down the block carried a violin case. Ruthie skipped at his side, clutching her little hymn book. And more, faces Clara had never expected, a young mother with twins, an old man with a cane, 3 teenagers with the restless light of song in their eyes. Clara's throat tightened. They had come. Despite the threats, despite the sign, they had come. She opened the doors with a flourish, ignoring the protest of hinges. "Welcome," she said, voice breaking with pride. "Welcome to your theater." The lobby filled with laughter, chatter, the squeak of shoes on tile. It sounded alive in a way the Monarch hadn't in years. But then, the heavy stomp of boots. Mr. Ransom appeared from the hallway, whistle bouncing against his chest, 2 uniformed policemen at his back. Their badges caught the dim light like small, sharp suns. "Miss Evans," Ransom said, voice oily with authority, "this gathering is unauthorized. You'll have to clear these people out." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ruthie clutched her hymn book tighter. Miss Hattie's jaw tightened. Clara stepped forward, her palms still stinging from the nail wound, and squared her shoulders. "They are here at my invitation. This theater belongs to me." One policeman smirked. "Not according to the order posted." Clara reached into her pocket, pulled out the crumpled paper, and held it up high. "This order?" She let the crowd see the blood smear across the page. "This was nailed to my door like I was a trespasser in my own house. But the deed says otherwise. You can wave papers all you like, but this theater carries my father's name in its very beams. And no badge can erase that." The second officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the crowd pressing closer. Leon and Percy lifted their drums, not in threat but in readiness. The beat of defiance seemed to hang in the air, waiting. "Mr. Ransom hissed. You're making a mistake, Miss Evans. You can't fight the board. You can't fight the town." Clara met his eyes, steady as stone. "I'm not fighting the town," she said softly. "I'm fighting for it." She turned to the people, lifted her hand. "Come! The stage is waiting." And like water breaking a dam, they followed her down the aisle. The policeman hesitated, unwilling to wade into that tide. Ransom's whistle shrieked in the emptiness, but the sound was swallowed by footsteps, voices, breath. Clara climbed the steps first, standing tall at center. Leon's drum thudded once, twice, anchoring the moment. Percy joined, syncopation snapping like sparks. The violin sang a trembling note. And then Miss Hattie's voice rose, cracked but strong, filling the theater with song. The Monarch trembled awake. The theater smelled of sweat and hope by the time the last voice fell silent. Auditions had run all morning, each performance braver than the last. A boy stammered through Shakespeare, forgetting half the lines but refusing to leave the stage. A girl sang with a voice thin as glass yet sharp enough to pierce. Mr. Dupree's violin cracked on a high note, and the crowd still clapped like it was symphony. Clara wrote each name in the ledger as if inscribing history: Leon, Percy, Ruthie, Hattie, Dupree, and more besides 30, 40 names by noon. The Monarch's bones creaked under the weight of something it had not held in years: belonging. But outside the theater walls, resistance was gathering. At lunch, Clara stepped onto the sidewalk for air. The fog had burned away, leaving the sky clean and cruelly blue. Across the street, a cluster of men in work jackets leaned against a truck. Their eyes followed her like knives. One spat deliberately onto the curb. Another muttered loud enough to carry. A circus. Laughter followed, ugly and sharp. When she returned inside, Elaine was waiting in the lobby with her clipboard. She didn't bother with greetings. "You've made quite the spectacle," Elaine said, lips pinched. "But you should know, the board will not fund this nonsense. No rentals, no insurance coverage, no city permits." She scribbled something furiously onto her papers. "Without money, this is all play acting." Clara looked past her at the people in the auditorium, still laughing and talking, their voices filling the once empty house. "Play acting has saved more lives than numbers ever will," she said quietly. Elaine's smile was brittle. "Dream while you can, Miss Evans. The board meets Tuesday. They will not be kind." She turned and clicked away, heels striking the tile like hammers. By mid-afternoon, Clara gathered the performers on stage for one final moment. They formed a ragged circle, children and elders, trained singers and stumbling novices, all bound by the simple fact that they had been allowed to stand here. "This stage is yours," Clara said, her voice carrying to the rafters. "You may have been told otherwise your whole lives. But today you stood here. Remember it. Carry it." Leon lifted his drum. "Boom," Percy answered with a grin. Miss Hattie raised her chin, and the others began to clap. For one electric moment, it felt as though the Monarch itself might shake loose from its foundations and soar. But the spell broke when the heavy side door slammed open. Whitford strode in, flanked by two board members, their shoes clicking against the wood. He looked at the circle of singers, at Clara in the center, and his face darkened with disdain. "What is this?" he barked. Clara stood tall. "This is the Monarch. Alive again." Whitford's voice dripped scorn. This rabble? These children, these amateurs? This theater was built for refinement, not some church basement jamboree." Gasps rippled. Ruthie clutched her hymn book. Leon's hands curled around his drumsticks. Clara's voice was steady, though her heart hammered. "These are voices of the community. They belong here more than anyone." One board member sneered. "Donors won't pay to see this mess. You'll ruin the theater's reputation before you open the doors." Clara took a step forward, her shadow long across the stage. "The only thing that ruins a theater is silence. And I will not allow silence here." Whitford's eyes narrowed to slits. He gestured sharply to the policeman who had trailed behind. "Shut it down. Now." The officers hesitated. The performers stood frozen. For one breath, it seemed everything might collapse. Then Miss Hattie stepped forward, voice ringing like a bell. "You will not touch her," she declared. "Not in her father's house. Not in ours." Her defiance cracked the tension. Others shouted agreement. Mr. Dupree raised his violin like a weapon. Leon and Percy struck their drums in rhythm, filling the space with thunder. The policeman faltered, uncertain, retreating a step. Whitford's fury blazed, but his words were drowned by the sound of music, ragged, imperfect, unstoppable. Clara lifted her voice into the storm. Not a speech, not a protest. A song. One by one, the others joined, until the Monarch shook with it. Whitford stood stiff and silent, powerless in the face of something he could not purchase, silence, or erase. Tuesday came with a cruel brightness, sunlight bouncing off windows like knives. Clara walked to the board meeting with the ledger tucked under her arm, its pages swelling with names, the living proof that the monarch had breathed again. Each signature felt like a shield. But as she approached the courthouse steps, she felt the weight of eyes. White townsfolk clustered along the sidewalk, whispering, pointing. A newspaper boy shouted headlines from a fresh stack. Evans' daughter stirs trouble at Monarch Theatre. Clara froze, her stomach lurching. She grabbed a copy. The front page blared. Clara Evans, inexperienced daughter of the late August Evans, has been holding unauthorized gatherings at the Monarch Theatre. Reports describe noise, disorder, and potential fire hazards. Patrons and donors express concern that the once prestigious venue is being reduced to chaos. Her throat burned as if the ink itself were poison. She shoved a nickel at the boy and folded the paper under her arm, walking faster up the courthouse steps. Inside, the boardroom smelled of cigar smoke and old varnish. The long table gleamed, and every seat was filled with white faces turned against her. Whitford sat at the head, Cole at his right, Elaine with her clipboard to the left. "Miss Evans," Whitford said, voice sharp as a blade. "We've reviewed your recent activities. Unauthorized assemblies. Disorderly conduct. And now the press is involved. This cannot continue." Clara set the ledger on the table, open to the page crammed with names. "These are community members who came to audition. To sing. To reclaim a theater that belongs to them as much as it does to you." Cole snorted. "Children with drums? Housewives with hymn books. That isn't theater. That's a circus." A ripple of chuckles moved down the line. Clara forced her voice calm. "This is the beginning of something alive. My father believed theater should reflect truth. These people carry truth in their bones." Whitford leaned forward. "And donors carry money in theirs. Without them, your lights stay off. Your seats stay empty. Your precious ledger is worthless if no one pays to sit in the audience." He slid a document across the table toward her. Legal letterhead. The words at the top made her chest constrict. "Notice of review, ownership and operational authority of the Monarch Theatre." Whitford's voice was silk, hiding steel. "We are contesting your capacity to manage this property. Until the review is complete, all programming is suspended. Staff are instructed not to follow your directives. Vendors will not honor your orders. And if you attempt further disruptions, police will intervene." Clara stared at the paper. The letters blurred, swimming in her vision. For a moment, she felt the floor tilt under her, as if she stood on a ship in a storm. She thought of her father's voice. "They will try to push you off your own stage. Stand anyway." She drew a long breath. "You can write as many papers as you like. The monarch remembers who built it. You cannot evict memory." Whitford's jaw tightened. "We'll see what the courts decide." As Clara left, whispers followed her like hounds. On the courthouse steps, a group of men laughed loudly, mocking. One called after her, "How's the circus, Miss Evans?" Another barked like a dog. Clara kept walking, back straight, every step hammering her vow into the pavement. But inside, fear gnawed. Papers. Courts. Police. How could she fight them all? When she reached the Monarch, she found Leon and Percy waiting with their drums. Miss Hattie stood beside them, blue hat proud. Ruthie skipped in circles. "You look tired," Miss Hattie said gently. Clara forced a smile. "Just another storm." Leon tilted his head. "Storms pass, Miss Evans." "We don't." Her throat tightened. She knelt, pressed her hand against the theater's old brick, and whispered, "We'll keep singing. Even if they turn every light to black." The sabotage came quickly, like a tide determined to wash her away. The next morning, Clara arrived to find the theater doors chained shut with heavy iron links. A new notice flapped on the glass: "Property closed pending legal review. Trespassers will be prosecuted." Her stomach dropped. She rattled the chains, solid, cold, final. But footsteps echoed behind her. Leon, Percy, Miss Hattie, Mr. Dupree, Ruthie, and more, a dozen community members gathering with faces tight with worry and anger. They locked us out? Percy muttered, fists clenched. Clara turned slowly, meeting their eyes. Then we'll rehearse outside. And she meant it. Right there on the sidewalk, Leon's drumbeat cracked the morning air. Percy clapped a rhythm. Miss Hattie lifted her voice. Passers-by stopped, stared. Some laughed, some sneered, but others paused with something softer in their eyes. By the end of the hour, a small crowd had gathered, swaying to the music. But humiliation waited. That afternoon, the local paper printed another headline. Noisy demonstrations outside the Monarch. Evans' daughter disrupts business district. Photographs showed Clara and her people singing in the street, their faces twisted mid-note, distorted to look like chaos. The caption sneered. Is this leadership? Clara read the paper in the lamplight of her mother's kitchen. Her hands trembled so badly she spilled coffee across the table. Tears burned her eyes. They're turning us into mockery, she whispered. Her mother laid a hand over hers. Let them print what they like. Ink fades. But sound? Sound carries. The words steadied her. Still, the pressure mounted. The board sent letters threatening eviction. Donors withdrew funds. Local businesses refused to rent costumes or instruments. Performers wavered, frightened. One evening, Clara entered the Monarch through the side door she had pried open with Leon's help. The theater was dark, hushed, but she lit a single lamp on stage. Its glow stretched across the boards like a fragile lifeline. She sat cross-legged in the center, the ledger open in her lap. Name after name stared back. Each one a promise. Each one a burden. She whispered them aloud, like a litany. Leon. Percy. Hattie. Dupree. Ruthie. The sound echoed through the empty seats, carrying more power than she expected. It steadied her breath. Then, faintly, from the street outside came a rhythm, boom. Boom. Boom boom. Leon's drum. Clara smiled through her tears. They had not abandoned her. Even chained out, they kept the beat alive. She closed the ledger, pressed her palm to the boards, and whispered to her father's ghost. They are tearing at me with paper and ink. But the stage still knows our names. Tomorrow, Papa, will sing louder. The Monarch stood silent under a low sky, its chained doors glinting like manacles. For 3 days, no rehearsal had filled its halls. No drumbeat had echoed down its aisles. The theater felt less like a house of art and more like a tomb, padlocked by men who mistook silence for order. Clara sat on her porch that morning, the ledger heavy in her lap. The newspaper lay unfolded beside her, its headline a knife. Disorderly Evans defiant against court order. Community grows restless. Beneath, photographs of Leon and Percy drumming in the street. The boys' faces had been captured mid-expression, their mouths open, eyes wild. The caption read, Street noise or performance? Clara pressed her hands over her face. Shame burned through her, shame not for herself but for them. They had given everything, and the world had twisted it into ridicule. Her mother's voice broke the silence. Child, you look like the sky before thunder. Heavy, waiting to break. Clara lowered her hands, tears clinging. They're making fools of us, Mama. Every paper. Every whisper. Donors are gone, staff turned against me. Even some of our own are afraid to come now. Her mother set a hand over hers, firm. Afraid doesn't mean faithless. Storms scatter birds, but they know where to return. You keep that stage ready, Clara. Keep it ready. But keeping it ready felt like trying to light a fire in rain. That evening, she crept back into the Monarch through the narrow side door Leon had shown her. The air inside was stale, the seats shadowed in gloom. She climbed onto the stage and sat cross-legged, the single lamp flickering weakly. She opened the ledger. Only half the names were left. Fear had whittled the rest away. Her chest ached. She whispered, Papa, am I failing you? No answer came, only the creak of the old building settling. For the first time, Clara laid her forehead on the boards and let the sobs come. They shook her shoulders, tore her throat raw. She cried for her father, for her people, for the injustice that seemed to multiply with every step forward. When the tears finally ebbed, the silence pressed heavy. She almost didn't hear it at first, a faint rhythm from outside. Boom. Boom. Boom boom. Her head lifted. Through the door crack came the unmistakable pulse of Leon's drum. Percy's lighter syncopation answered. Then Miss Hattie's voice, faint but steady, carrying a hymn. Clara staggered to her feet. She flung open the side door. There they were, a handful only, but faithful. Leon, Percy, Miss Hattie, Mr. Dupree, Ruthie. Standing in the street, rain dampening their shoulders, keeping the beat alive. Clara's heart swelled. She stepped outside, raised her voice to join theirs. No stage. No lights. No audience but the night itself. Still, it was theater. Still, it was theirs. And for a brief, shining moment, the storm of despair cracked open, letting hope bleed through. But the board was not finished. The next morning, Clara arrived to find a new humiliation. Across the Monarch's entrance, a massive banner stretched from column to column. Coming soon, grand reopening, under new management. Below, smaller letters, sponsored by the Board of Trustees. Her chest seized. They were trying to erase her. Rewrite her father's legacy. Claim her theater as their own. A small crowd had gathered, whispering, pointing. Some looked at Clara with pity, others with satisfaction. Whitford appeared from the lobby, coat pressed, smile sharp. "Good morning, Miss Evans," he said smoothly. "As you can see, we've taken the liberty of planning a proper reopening. Professionals. Donors. Respectable programming." Clara's voice trembled, but she held her ground. "This theater is mine. My father's name built it." Whitford leaned close, his words venom wrapped in silk. "Names fade, Miss Evans. Money endures. And you? You'll be nothing but a footnote. Unless you step aside gracefully." Her throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to claw the banner down with her bare hands. But she stood still, her silence burning hotter than words. Behind her, Leon and Percy arrived, drums slung low. Miss Hattie's hat bobbed through the crowd. Ruthie clutched her hymn book. "Miss Evans?" Leon asked, eyes wide. Clara forced herself to breathe. "Don't look at the banner," she whispered. "Look at the building. It still knows us." But that night, alone in her room, she broke again. She pressed her face into her pillow and let the sobs rack her body. "Papa," she whispered into the dark. "They're erasing us. I don't know if I can win." Her eyes fell on the ledger lying open on the desk. The names seemed to glow faintly in the lamplight. Leon. Percy. Hattie. Dupree. Ruthie. Names etched not in ink but in courage. Clara wiped her tears and sat straighter. "If they want me gone," she whispered, "they'll have to drag me off the stage. And I'll leave claw marks on the boards." Outside, the drumbeat rose again. Faint, but insistent. Boom. Boom. Boom boom. The sound of resilience refusing to die. Clara closed the ledger, clutched it to her chest, and whispered, "We're not finished. Not yet." Sunday dawned cold and clear, the kind of morning that carried the bite of unfinished business. Clara walked up Maple Street with the ledger under her arm, every step echoing like a vow. The banner still hung across the Monarch, grand reopening, under new management. Its white letters sneered against the brick. But Clara didn't flinch. She walked straight to the chain doors, lifted her chin, and began pulling at the links. Leon and Percy were there within minutes, drums slung on their backs. Miss Hattie followed, blue hat tilted, hymn book in hand. Mr. Dupree, Ruthie, the young mother with twins, the old man with a cane. One by one, the loyal few gathered, faces set with determination. Clara turned to them. "They want to erase us. But today, we remind the Monarch who it belongs to. If they shut us out, We'll sing to the bricks until they open themselves. Leon grinned. Then let's wake these walls. And so they did. The drums cracked like thunder, voices rose like a tide, Ruthie's little hymn weaving with Miss Hattie's alto. The sound carried down the block, pulling more neighbors from their porches, more passers-by into the street. Soon a crowd swelled, clapping, singing, stamping their feet. Inside, lights flickered on in the lobby. Whitford appeared in the doorway, his face pale with fury. He gestured wildly to the policeman beside him. Disperse! His voice rang. This is trespassing. This theater is closed. Clara stepped forward, voice ringing above the din. This theater has never been closed. You chain doors, not voices. And voices don't need keys. The crowd roared. The drums doubled in speed. For the first time, Whitford looked uncertain. Then, from deep in the audience, someone shouted, Let her in! She owns it! And the chant began, spreading like wildfire. Let her in! Let her in! Whitford's composure cracked. He barked orders, but the policeman hesitated. The crowd was too large now, too fierce, too unified. Clara placed her hand against the door, palm pressed to the cold glass. Papa, she whispered. We're home. The standoff stretched taut as a wire. Whitford's face gleamed with sweat under the lobby lights, his fury sharpening into desperation. He raised a set of keys high, as if daring her. You want in? You'll destroy this place with your noise, your chaos. Better the monarch die with dignity than be turned into your carnival. Clara's chest heaved. For a heartbeat, doubt stabbed her. Was she dragging her people into danger? Was she risking arrest, ruin, humiliation? Then Ruthie tugged her sleeve. The child's eyes were wide but steady. Miss Evans, she whispered. This is our stage too. The words struck like lightning. Clara lifted her chin. We're not chaos, she said loud enough for all to hear. We are the story this theater was built for. With one sharp motion, she tore the board's banner from the columns. The cloth ripped down, falling in a heap at her feet. The crowd erupted in cheers, a sound so loud it rattled the windows. Whitford's voice cracked as he screamed, Arrest her! The policeman stepped forward, but the crowd surged, wall of bodies between Clara and the threat. Miss Hattie's voice soared above the chaos, a hymn that wrapped the moment in unshakable defiance. Leon and Percy pounded the drums like war, like prayer. The policeman froze. Too many witnesses. Too much unity. Clara raised her voice one last time. Open these doors! Or we will keep singing until the whole city knows you're afraid of a song. The chant rose again, deafening now. Let her in! Let her in! Whitford's hands trembled. He fumbled with the keys. The lock clicked. The chains rattled loose, falling heavy against the door. Gasps swept the crowd. Clara stepped forward, pushed the doors wide, and the monarch breathed again, lights blazing, dust shimmering in the air like gold. She turned to her people. Come in, she said softly. The stage is waiting. And together they crossed the threshold. The theater air was electric, humming with breath and footsteps. Dust rose in golden shafts as the crowd poured in, filling the monarch with life it had not tasted in years. Seats creaked, whispers fluttered like wings, children giggled nervously as if entering forbidden ground. Clara stood at the edge of the stage, staring out at the faces. So many faces. Some she knew, Hattie with her blue hat pinned firm, Leon and Percy carrying their drums like armor, Mr. Dupree polishing his violin bow with trembling hands. Others were strangers, neighbors drawn by the sound, curiosity, or the promise of something larger than themselves. Her knees trembled. Fear pressed tight against her ribs. What if Whitford was right? What if this ended in chaos, humiliation, failure? She closed her eyes. In the silence of her mind, her father's voice rose. You always find the light, Clara. Theater doesn't wait for permission. It waits for breath. She stepped onto the boards, her heels striking the wood like a heartbeat. The house fell quiet, hundreds of eyes turning toward her. Good evening, she said, her voice trembling, then steadying. My name is Clara Evans. This is my father's house. This is our house. And tonight we open the Monarch together. Applause thundered. Some rose to their feet, clapping with the hunger of years denied. But in the shadows of the wings, Whitford seethed. He whispered harsh orders to staff, gestured toward the breaker box. A stagehand slipped toward it, hand reaching for the lever. Leon spotted him. Without missing a beat, he slammed his drum in a thunderous roll that snapped every head toward him. The boy grinned, sweat gleaming, and kept playing, louder, faster, daring anyone to silence him. The breaker went untouched. Clara lifted her arms. We begin, she declared. Miss Hattie stepped forward first, her hymn spilling into the rafters. Her voice cracked, but the crowd leaned closer, as if that crack carried more truth than perfection ever could. Percy joined on the drum, Ruthie on her hymn book, Dupree's violin weaving fragile beauty between them. One by one, performers filled the stage, stumbling, singing, shouting, dancing. Raw and unpolished, yet alive with defiance. The Monarch shook awake, and the board could do nothing but watch. The performance rolled like a river, sometimes messy, sometimes uncertain, but unstoppable. Children recited poetry with trembling voices. Teenagers sang gospel that rattled the stained glass in the lobby. Old men clapped rhythm, old women lifted harmony, and together they wove a tapestry of sound no money could buy. Clara moved among them, guiding, encouraging, steady as a lighthouse. When a girl forgot her lines, Clara whispered the words into her ear. When Dupree's violin string snapped, Clara clapped the rhythm with her hands until the crowd picked it up. Nothing stopped them. But Whitford wasn't finished. He stormed into the aisle with a bullhorn, shouting over the music. This is illegal! This theater belongs to the board! You are trespassing! The bullhorn blared, shrill and ugly, but the crowd drowned him in applause. Clara turned, her eyes locking on his. She didn't raise her voice, she simply let the silence between songs fall long enough for every ear to hear. This stage, she said, was built on voices that were never meant to be heard. Tonight we hear them. If that is trespassing, then let history record that the truth broke in. The crowd erupted, stamping feet, clapping hands, voices rising in a chant. Clara! 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 Whitford's face twisted with fury. He gestured wildly, but even his allies shrank back. The tide had turned. The final act came like lightning. Leon and Percy thundered a rhythm, Dupree struck his last triumphant chord, Hattie sang until tears streaked her cheeks. Clara stepped forward, hands raised high. For every name in this ledger, she cried, holding the book aloft. For every story denied, the Monarch is alive again. The ovation shook the roof. People wept openly. Strangers embraced. The walls themselves seemed to sigh, as if grateful to be filled once more with life instead of silence. And in the shadows, Whitford lowered his bullhorn, powerless. The applause rolled on long after the final note had faded, a storm of sound crashing against the rafters of the Monarch. Clara stood at center stage, chest heaving, tears streaking down her face. She looked into the sea of faces, black and white, young and old, and for the first time, she saw not division but something closer to unity. Miss Hattie clutched Ruthie's hand, both of them glowing with joy. Leon and Percy stood like warriors beside their drums, grinning as sweat poured down their faces. Mr. Dupree polished his violin with trembling reverence, as if it had been sanctified. Clara whispered to herself, Papa, do you hear them? But in the wings, Whitford still lurked, his fists tight, his face pale. He climbed the steps and stormed onto the stage, bullhorn dangling at his side. The applause faltered into murmurs. This is unlawful, he shouted, voice cracking under the strain. You think this is victory? The board will sue, the donors will strip every cent, the city will shut you down. This is the end of the Monarch as you know it. The silence that followed was sharp as a blade. For a moment, Clara felt fear gnaw at her ribs again. But then, from the balcony, an old man's voice cut through. No, sir. This is the beginning. the crowd roared. Whitford tried to speak again, but his voice was drowned in chants. Clara! 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 His words dissolved like ink in water. He lowered the bullhorn, sweat dripping down his temples, realizing power had slipped from his grasp. Clara stepped forward, steady and calm. You can hold papers. You can shout laws. But you cannot hold voices. You cannot lock the truth out of its own house. The monarch belongs to the people now. The crowd rose to their feet, applause cascading once more. Whitford, pale and beaten, stumbled backward into the wings, swallowed by his own irrelevance. Clara turned to the people, the lights washing her in gold. For the first time, she felt it, not just her father's shadow, but her own light. That night, when the seats had emptied and the last hymn had faded into the rafters, Clara lingered alone on stage. The theater was hushed, but not silent. The boards hummed with the echo of footsteps, the walls pulsed with the memory of voices. It felt alive, awake, grateful. She carried the ledger to center stage and set it on the floor. Slowly, reverently, she knelt and wrote one more name beneath the list. August Evans. Her father's name. The name that had built the monarch. She underlined it twice, tears dripping onto the page. Papa, she whispered, we did it. They tried to chain the doors, but we sang them open. They tried to erase us, but the people wrote themselves back into these walls. The monarch lives. She closed the book gently, pressed her palm to the cover, then rose. From the back of the theater, Leon's drum rolled softly, just once. Clara turned, smiling through her tears. Leon, Percy, Hattie, Ruthie, Dupree, they had returned, slipping quietly inside. We couldn't leave you here alone, Miss Hattie said, her hat in her hands. Clara laughed softly. Then let's make it official. Together, they stood at center stage, hand in hand. Clara lifted her chin. This theater will never again be silenced. Tomorrow, we begin rehearsals for our first full production. And every soul who stood with us tonight will have a place in it. The others nodded, eyes shining. Ruthie whispered, it's really ours now. Clara looked out into the darkened seats, seeing them filled in her mind's eye, row upon row, generation after generation. Yes, she said, voice steady. Ours. Forever. The monarch seemed to sigh in agreement. The chandeliers swayed gently, as if bowing to its new sovereign. And as Clara extinguished the last lamp, the theater stood not as a relic of the past but as a promise that stories silenced too long would finally find their stage. The night the monarch's doors were forced open by song, Clara Evans did more than win back a theater. She restored memory. She resurrected her father's legacy. And she gave her community a place where their voices could finally rise without apology. The board tried to bury her in papers, chains, and shame. But papers fade, chains rust, and shame cannot survive in the presence of courage. In the end, it was not money or power that kept the monarch alive. It was people. It was names written in a ledger, sung into history. It was the belief that no story, once spoken, can ever truly be silenced. And that is the legacy Clara left behind, not just a building, but a promise. That truth, no matter how long suppressed, will always find its stage. This has been the Theater Curtain, on Blackness Hour. If Clara's courage moved you, let her story remind you to stand your ground when silence is demanded of you. And don't forget, subscribe to the channel, share these stories, and help us keep amplifying the voices that history tried to quiet. Because here, every story matters. And here, every story is heard.